All right. My bad. Yeah, thank you guys. So Penn INSPIRE is the Penn Interdisciplinary Network for scientists promoting inclusion, retention, and equity. We're a very new student group at Penn. We started around October of last year, and we're very focused and excited to sort of dispel and try to promote actionable change in the sort of, again, like recruitment retention of URM students so that they can get to the highest levels of influence within the scientific community. And today I'm very honored to be moderating this panel, What Inspires You? I'll just ask the panelists to introduce themselves so you can sort of say who you are, what is your current position, and your preferred pronouns. And perhaps a very brief overview of sort of what is your like main either research or advocacy or training interest. So I will like to start with Dr. Kiki Fairfax, if you want to take the lead.
Sure. I am Kiki Fairfax, she, her. My lab works mainly on schistosomiasis, but in the basic immunology space, we work on understanding B and T cell interactions required to generate long-term immunity in response to vaccination. And in the realm of schistosomiasis, we work on maternal schistosomiasis and Helminth-induced protection from the development of metabolic disease. I am an assistant professor for 2 more months at the University of Utah and the director of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion for the Department of Pathology. And I've been a faculty member for 7 years now.
Amazing. Next we'll have Dr. Marcos Ortega.
Evening, everybody. My name is Marcos Ortega. I'm an assistant professor of biochemistry at Cal State Fullerton in Southern California. My lab studies viral assembly, focusing on every aspect of viral assembly capsids to DNA packaging. And we use biophysics, but I also do a lot of collaborations with structural biology, looking at a lot of medicinal chemistry, small molecules binding enzymes that we purify for other people in the lab. I am in my 4th year here at Cal State Fullerton, but previously I was an assistant professor at McAllister College in St. Paul, Minnesota for 4 years, where I also taught. So, and I'm primarily, I primarily like institutions where I can really have an impact in the classroom and then also hopefully in the lab where I'm mentoring undergrads. We do a lot of undergraduate research. So my advocacy is really for just the equity and education.
All right, next we will have Dr. Stanley Adoro.
Hi, I'm Stanley Adoro. I'm an assistant professor at Case Western Reserve University in the School of Medicine. Let me just start by saying thank you guys for asking me to be on this panel. I think it's a great idea that you guys have started this, and there is a real need for this. So I'm a Penn alumni. I did my immunology at Penn. I got my PhD there from 2009. I started my lab at Case about 3.5 years ago. And in the lab, we study protein quality control in immune cells. And essentially, the idea that we have, or what we are trying to advocate, is that just as you have a genome quality control machinery in every eukaryotic, in every cell, you also have a parallel machinery that controls protein quality. And just as defect or dysfunction in the genome quality control machinery, so what the machinery that regulates DNA homeostasis. So we know extensively, from extensive studies, that defects in DNA damage control, DNA quality control is detrimental to health. So my lab is trying to advance a parallel universe, so to speak, that damages in proteome quality control can also be detrimental to cells, and in this case, immune cells. And that's really the focus of my lab, looking at how proteome quality control regulates immune cell differentiation, function, and as well as malignancy. I'm also a member, or at least a member of the Dean's Advisory Committee on diversity and inclusive excellence. So because this has been an issue that has come to the forefront in a lot of academic centers like Case as well. So I'm very happy to be on this panel and I look forward to having a fruitful, exciting discussion.
Thank you. And last but not least, soon to be Dr. Roderick Gilbert. Take the stand.
Well, technically, I'll be Dr. Gilbert officially at the end of, well, May 13th. I've already defended, so it's just a matter of formality. So that's why the C is proudly hanging on to the DRPH title, but it'll be rubbed off immediately come May. So then I'll be fully Dr. Gilbert. So just want to make sure I make that clarity out of respect for people who already earned their doctorates. I don't want to, anyway. So started, just came here from, goodness, I've been in consulting work prior to this, but my background is predominantly public health, which is what I got my degree in, but also academic medical centers in terms of doing diversity, equity, inclusion work. This will be my first chief role, but prior to that, or every other role prior to that was a senior director, or both for human resources in terms of organizational development, as well as director for organizational diversity and inclusion and strategy. So for both from Penn State prior to here, then before that, Ole Miss, or the University of Mississippi Medical Center, where I'm from Mississippi. You'll hear the drawl every once in a while. Oh, my pronouns, he, him, and y'all if I'm back home. Let's see, and then prior to going back home, where I met my wife in Boston, where I worked with at Boston University, which is my first foray into diversity work, Boston University School of Medicine. And then also the Department of Veterans Affairs. So come a long way. Been in this work for 15 years now. That's kind of a big breath to say, but time certainly does fly and things happen. So I'm very grateful for the trajectory I have and the work I've done. And my dissertation was the effectiveness, or lack thereof, of the gun control policies in states, in pro-gun states versus anti-gun states, and that's term. I'm using very loose terms, but essentially the objective was to demonstrate how states can sort of circumvent municipal gun laws that are intended to restrict access to guns or control access to guns, but they don't. In short, they don't, and how really states need to reassess their ability to circumvent municipal law in the process. So that's a short summary of it.
Thank you, guys. So tonight I would like to start with Kiki and Stanley, and this is your question. How has your background influenced your motivation, or inspired you to pursue science research, training, and advocacy as a career?
Okay, can you go first?
Okay. So, I always wanted to be a scientist from the time I was 5 or 6. Jane Goodall was my hero. And so there was always a determination to do that. It was also instilled in me very early by my father that I had to be twice as good as everybody else. And so we moved to Michigan. He was a lawyer, graduated at the top of his class from Columbia Law. And he was told in New York, when my parents lived in New York, that he would never make partner because he was Black. And so he moved to corporate law and started working at General Motors, and became head of product liability. And he, from the time I was a kid, was very dedicated in his career to increasing minority and women outside lawyers, because all automakers and other corporate law firms hire outside lawyers for their local cases, in addition to a lead from in-house. So he was committed to changing the face of that. And over the course of his 20 years at General Motors, went from less than 1% Black and women-owned law firms working with them to over 41%. And that was always a shining example for me that change could happen. You know, even when he retired, he was leaving a toxic work environment. That never really changed. But he was able to give a lot of people opportunities. And so that was always in the back of my head. And from the time I was in undergrad, I volunteered in underserved neighborhoods, tutoring. I'd been tutoring since I was 13. I started my first tutoring business at 12 or 13. But in college, I started volunteering in underserved neighborhoods. And then my only paid jobs were either tutoring or research, were the only paid jobs I've ever had in my life. And that really instilled in me that I could do something. I could make a difference in kids' lives. I never had a role model that looked like me in science to look up to, you know, so my father was definitely a role model for me in terms of being a leader. But I had nobody in science. There were 0 Black biomedical faculty members at the University of Chicago, which is where I did my undergrad. I did my PhD at Yale, and there were 2. One in public health, Curtis, who's fabulous, fabulous man, and the first Black female scientist I ever met that was biomedical, who ran the STARS program that I worked in at Yale, which targeted underrepresented minorities their freshman year that had a weak STEM background. And Dr. Black was really the first time I saw somebody that looked like me that was successful in academic science. And it became really clear to me that I had to be able to serve as a role model. And I experienced many, many, many toxic situations, lots of tokenization. And my goal was always I didn't want the next generation to have nearly as much of that. So those experiences really shaped the way I live my life and my career now. And I love my science, but the other work is equally as important to me. Your turn, Stanley.
Yeah, well, so I think I have a different sort of I guess a very different story from KK. So I grew up in Nigeria where, you know, we had very little resources to do science, or not to talk of immunology, just the basic biochemical science. And my interest was always to be a medical doctor. So I actually started out in medical school with the desire to be a medical doctor. And the only reason why I was in medical school, that is the main reason, was my parents wanted me to be a medical doctor. And my mom and dad were, you know, that was a big deal in the house. I was going to be the family doctor. So I had to make sure that dream was realized in the family. So which meant I had to always come first in class. So I just had to be at the top of my class, so that I was going to make it to medical school. So I ended up getting into medical school. But what drove me to do science was something a little odd. So I started reading a biochemistry textbook, and then somehow, I don't know, you call it whatever you want. I realized how much more fascinating biochemistry was than what I thought was a career, the medical career was going to provide me, because I was more fascinated by chemical structures and being able to do stuff like I was seeing in the chemistry textbook. So I went home and I told my parents that I've had a change, that I had a change of heart. Obviously, I couldn't tell them that the reason for that was because I fell in love with chemistry. So I gave them a different reason. I said, you know, Mom, Dad, so in Nigeria, you go to med school right out of secondary or high school. So it was an 8-year program. So I said, my reason, I said, you know, I don't know if I have the patience to be in school for 8 years trying to become a medical doctor, that it was such a long training process. So that I wasn't sure I really wanted to remain in medicine. they didn't understand it, but they were upset, but they understood that, well, 8 years is such a really long time. But guess what? I went into research, and by the time you add the PhD and the postdoc and all the time you spend getting to this point, luckily my parents were not keeping scores, because they would have come back to me and said, I thought you were not going to be in school for so long. That was the whole point of not going to med school. But bottom line here, that my inspiration to go to med school, to become a scientist, was really born out of a pure odd event that I just realized I had a better interest in chemistry and biochemistry. And that was what made me make my mind up. And I grew up in Nigeria. All my mentors were Nigerians, and I never really had formal access to cutting edge science until I came here to do the PhD. But I should mention that I think that's something that I would probably get back to during this, because of this discussion, that I had a mentor in Nigeria when I finished undergrad, who gave me the opportunity to come work in his lab, unpaid, but just to spend time in the lab. And his lab was probably one of the 2 or 3 labs that were funded thanks to grants from the WHO in the city that I lived. So the city that I lived had like 5 million people, and there were only 2 labs that were funded that had money to support research. So I was introduced to him by a friend who knew I was interested in research, and he gave me the opportunity. And I think thanks to him, I have had access and gotten to the point where I am in today. So I think the motivation and the inspiration have been largely due to my parents, but also propelled by this mentor. His name is Mark, and he's retired now a while. But he's been a mentor that I think has served also as a real inspiration for my career. Why immunology? I went into my initial interest was biochemistry. I actually did my undergrad in biochemistry, and I had every intention to continue in a chemistry line. But so when I started working in Mark's lab and in this mentor's lab, he was doing research in malaria. And we had a stint where we had to go spend 3 months in some of the rural villages that were around the city where I live, where I was growing up in Nigeria. And it was during those 3 months that I realized that, first, we were trying to test malaria vaccine candidates. And it was very obvious that we didn't understand the immunology of so we're looking at the patients, at children that were exposed to malaria, and trying to understand their natural response to malaria antigens. And it dawned on me during that process that I didn't understand a lot of immunology, and that the key to solving some of these endemic diseases in Africa, especially malaria, rested on being able to understand the immune system and the immune response to malaria. So it was during that period that I realized I wanted to kind of focus my interest in immunology, and thankfully things worked out the way they had, that I ended up going to Penn to study immunology, and here I am. I have my own lab. I don't work on malaria right now, but I think that's been what has sort of shaped my career path up to this point.
Thank you guys for your honest responses. I want to turn to Marcus and Roderick right now. So your question is, how important has your community been to you and their support to get to where you are today?
I guess I'll go first. So it's been super duper important, right? So to kind of give you context, I got to tell you where I'm from, because it is a community. I'm from a border town in the Southwest, El Paso, Texas, right? So it's where Texas, New Mexico, and Mexico all meet. And it's as border town gets. It's full of, it's the same as anywhere from Arizona all the way down to the south of Texas. And so it's a very tight-knit community. It's 800,000 people, but it's predominantly Mexican, it's predominantly Spanish speaking. It's very working class. There is, because of the infrastructure of the bridges and Mexico right there is crime and drugs. Education is not a priority. It's kind of old school Mexican, where work is the value and not so much the education. And I grew up in that environment, and luckily I had a real forward thinking grandfather and he made his daughters go to college. And he still drove them old school style, right? Dropped them off and they all got degrees. And so my mom got a degree in sociology, became a teacher, said, you need to go to college. And I said, okay. but none of my friends were going to college, and some people were going to go to community college, but then the likelihood that people graduate is pretty low, and nobody's going to a 4-year university. So I had one friend, then we were going to go to UT Austin together. But I got cold called by a small college in Iowa called Grinnell College, and they found me because I'm brown. I had a high SAT score. And I played football. So I checked all these boxes, and I got a football coach calling me, and he says, I have somebody coming to talk to you. And ended up that it was cheaper for me to go there than a public university. So there was 2 other guys from El Paso going with me, and we jumped in, plane with our suitcases and went. And that same community that I had in El Paso kind of carried over to where I went in the middle of rural Iowa. And otherwise I wouldn't have made it because the academics and the rigor and just the difference was way too much for me. I struggled a lot academically and psychologically for a long time. And then had to go home for a while, came back and then finished up, right? But what made me go back and finish up with a degree in chemistry was my mom and my friends who grew up rough and me who grew up rough. And they're like, you're the only one doing this, you need to finish. And so when I was in places I shouldn't have been, when I was doing things I shouldn't have done, they would tell me to go home. When my mom knew I was doing things that I shouldn't have been doing, she would guilt me and call my friends and make sure I did this thing, right? And so when I graduated, we threw a big party. It lasted like 3 days. It was like old school mariachis in the backyard. And it was like a village raised that child. And so that sense of community is what I've always looked for, I guess, in science that I've never really found. And so I've tried to create it on my own, in my lab, in my class, by just being who I am and not shying away from my culture, not shying away from my otherness that's always been kind of tried to diminished. So, I mean, the foundation, and anybody who knows me knows this is kind of obnoxious. All my stories about El Paso, because that's my lens. My lens is this place that's kind of ignored and forgotten. But I think that should be included too. And so people like me, or anybody, right, that's kind of marginalized, I feel like open the door, let them through, because you don't know the value that they have. I was, and I'm sure we all have our stories, right? But I went through some terrible things, but it didn't mean I was less of a person. Just meant I had more to learn. So my community really is the lens of who I teach and how I mentor and what I do in the lab and the classroom, and why I chose this profession, really. I think we need more people that are bringing their culture and bringing their otherness to their respective fields.
Hi everyone. So I'm definitely the product of a collection, community collective. I'm a military brat. Father was Navy, mother was Army. So I was exposed to a lot of U.S. geographic subcultures, if you will, which I think sometimes we tend to take for granted that, every place has its own uniqueness to it. But predominantly, I grew up in Jackson, Mississippi, which is 70 to 84% predominantly. I think actually statistically, it literally is 84% predominantly African-American community. And I'm the product of families connected to the civil rights movement in Mississippi. So fighting for social injustice or challenging the status quo of Mississippi. So I had a lot of positive reinforcement and affirmation academically growing up in predominantly African-American schools that performed well academically. I know the usual stereotype of that Black schools underperform, but the schools I went to actually were higher performing schools. So, but also, I'm the product of the legacy of diversity work. Essentially, we didn't call it diversity work back then. We called it civil rights work, but that was diversity work. So started at Jackson State. So my academic legacy centers around Jackson State University, which is historically Black college university for those who don't know, the likes of Walter, for football heads, Walter Payton. A lot of greats came to that school. So but went there, and then could have played football. Did not want to. The day I saw the facility, said, nope, I'm not going to go here. I already had a full scholarship academically, so there was no point. And then Southern Miss's head coach, head coach and defense coordinator asked me to come to them because I was a pretty good athlete in high school. And my former coach actually joined their staff. So I left my full scholarship at Jackson State University like an idiot and went to Southern Miss for a partial athletic scholarship and partial academic scholarship, and ended up on the scout team, which is the practice squad, and not even starting. So I lost that athletic scholarship, and then of course my parents didn't like that. So, but I found something a lot greater. This is peculiar because this is a PWI, predominantly white institution, University of Southern Mississippi. But I found my voice because I became active in student leadership. And that was because minority students had to cluster together to cope with things that happened at the institution, positive and negative. And then through those clusters, we were able to branch out and build coalitions with students not racialized as Black or not racialized as Hispanic or Asian or something. So, and we built that, but primarily there I found my voice. And that voice, I have to admit, was mentored and culminated, developed by institutional leadership, and I'm talking like the vice president of the institution, as well as the dean of students and assistant dean for student affairs. They took every student leader and they personally mentored us, which is something you don't see. You don't see a president or vice president of a university working and engaging student leaders to develop them personally. So that was something I'll never forget. And so I really found my voice. I found how to use my voice in addition to finding my voice there. But then once I got my master's there, I left and started this work. And then when we came back home to Mississippi after finding my wife, I got with Jackson State again for my doctorate. And that is where I really found my ability to critically think, and also develop my leadership skills, I would say, in terms of higher ed leadership, which is essentially what I'm doing now. And I have two doctors, two Nigerian brothers, as a matter of fact, to thank for that, Dr. Emeka Nwagu and Dr. Emmanuel Ahua. I credit them, in addition to crediting my mother and father for giving me I think a pretty quick mind. I thank them individually for helping me really hone myself in critical writing as well as critical thinking. They took it to a whole nother level. So I love those two brothers to death, and I owe them everything. So, being at those places, inside and outside of communities where I feel like I was, where it was homogenously Black, racialized as Black community versus not so much. I feel like I've had opportunities and exposure to things that really helped me be who I am today. And even the failures. I came to Southern Miss, my major was pre-dentistry. I had good grades. I was given an interview. I knew the people at the hospital because I'd done research in high school at that dental school. So I was very familiar with the faculty. I thought this was a slam dunk till I met with the dean, and the dean asked me a question about who I wanted to, if I could meet anyone in history, who would it be? And of course I gave some benign, I'm pretty sure I said Gandhi or something like that, trying to sound, pious. And then he said,
yeah, so apologies for but I think so what I'm gathering from both you and Marcus is, and as well from Kiki and Stanley, is that the importance of number one, having a community, also the importance of representation, right? And the importance of mentorship, right? For people so that we as URM scientists can show or be emboldened to show that otherness that Marcus was referring to show our through selves, particularly in these settings. I kind of want to ask whoever to want to volunteer to sort of answer this question. This is a little bit of a more serious question, right? I think we've all, in some aspect, way, shape, or form, have kind of faced discrimination about how we look like, who we love, our gender. And I just sort of want to ask, how have you handled some of these instances in which you face discrimination based on your ethnicity, race, or gender, particularly in an academic setting? And what is one important lesson that you have learned from these experiences? And whoever wants to sort of share is welcome to, but I'm not going to make anyone answer.
I can share a horrible story really quick. So, like I said, where I come from, this is a brand new path for me. I kind of have to meander my way through it, just like Kiki. I didn't have a whole lot of people that told me how to do things that meant something to me. It was always like kind of like this assimilation model, and wasn't. And from a guy from a border town, it doesn't make sense, right? It's like 1 and 1 always equals 3. So I found my way. I have found some people. I took bits and pieces of a lot of different people, and I finally get my first tenure track job, and I finally get keys to my own lab and my own office. I moved to Minnesota to a small liberal arts, and it aligns with everything I want to do, right? Undergrads, my own lab, teaching, the blend of the things I like. And I walk in the first day with my wife, a 1-year-old baby, and a 4-year-old. And it's a Saturday, I get it, but I had keys walking in. An older white gentleman's walking out, and 5 minutes later, security is saying, building's closed, comes to my office and says, building's closed, you need to leave. And obviously it's a little deflating. But the worst thing is, like, on Monday when I have to go tell the department chair, like, what happened, like, it makes them feel uncomfortable. And it's like, we'd have to have this like hand waving weird conversation about that I'm the only brown person in the building, in the science building. So the guy called and screamed because I look like a Mexican. And my wife was very upset. And that's when a handful of stories, I've been called a janitor. I've been called all kinds of different things, right? But it's just like, why do I have to like hide this to make other people comfortable? And then when it does make them uncomfortable, we have to have this like dishonest conversation. So we did, and it's just like, and it's tying, and that reason I want to say is because it ties it back to the community. So I mean, I was there for 4 years, but I went through so many things there. I was like, why am I even here? Like, I'm like this token, just like Kiki said, I'm this other person that's great on the website and great for recruitment trips and great for all these other things, right? So I looked for another job, and luckily I found this job at Cal State Fullerton, and I wanted a place where the student population matched more with me. And I found my community. I feel like, and people looked at me like I was nuts. Like, why are you leaving this wealthy, small school where, you know, they love the brown dude? I was like, because this will never be part of who I am. This will be something that's foreign from me. And in the neighborhood around it is the same thing, right? So that's just one of the experiences that pushes me back towards where I come from. And it's not my choice. Those people make those choices for me because of how they treat me based on what I look like. And it is what it is. I'm not going to change. Why should I? It doesn't impact my teaching or my science, but it is what it is.
Do you feel emboldened in this new environment to kind of have those difficult conversations? So I think it's important that, like, we as sort of scientists, that when we see these instances, we sort of share and kind of like tell people like, hey, this is uncomfortable, or this might not make me feel, you know, secure in who I am. Like, do you now feel like, how do you see that? What is your perspective on that particular, how things have changed, or not?
I don't think they have. I mean, I'm just being honest, right? And I'm older. It took me a long time to get where I'm at. I've had to figure things out my way, and I've always resisted assimilation because it doesn't mean stuff to. If I give up, the mentors who I had would tell me, you know, focus on these things. When you want to do some outreach work, come back after you get tenure, come back after your administration. And I'm like, how do I leave those people that made me who I am and then come back 20 years later? Like, now I'm here to help. And I get we're all different, and I expect that approach, but I can't walk away from who I am. So I've always been made to feel uncomfortable. You know, the purse clutching, the following me in a store. I still get pulled over by cops for fake broken lights and fake speeding all the time with my kids in the car. It's insane. So I've always been made to feel uncomfortable, but now everybody else has to feel a little bit uncomfortable. Oh, well, it's not my fault. I've been having these conversations for a long time, and that's what maybe rubs people the wrong way. But it's less about them, and it's more about my students, because I feel like they need to hear these things because it then validates the things that they have to go through. So I don't think there's been a change. Maybe there's been some more acknowledgement of pain and suffering of other populations, but I mean, my life is still my life. I still go through this stuff right now. And at Cal State Fullerton, this kind of elitist attitude about I need to act a certain way and look a certain way and teach a certain way because that's the right way. But that doesn't speak to our population of students. So it's just, I mean, I still go through the same things. It is what it is. But I just think it's more on the surface now. But is the substance there? I'm not so sure.
Kiki, did you want to share something?
Yeah, I was going to say, so I, you know, when I started my lab at Purdue, you know, it was a 9-month teaching position. I taught veterinary parasitology. And my first year of student evaluations were every horrible stereotype of a Black woman you could imagine. There were Black students. I was very close to most of them and mentored them. And, you know, the stories they would tell me of the things their classmates would say to them are, you know, horrific. And, you know, the response from most of my faculty mentors there, minus one, Candace, who I really credit for helping me to become who I am now. But for most of them was, well, you know, tone it down. You need to do this so that the students feel like they connect with you. And, you know, just be a little less gesturing, be a little less loud, and don't curse. And I didn't teach, I didn't curse in class, but I curse in my lab like a sailor. I'm from Detroit, okay? It's what we do. So the response was never, oh, the students shouldn't definitely say these things. It was, well, you should do this so that the students won't say these things. And my first chair at the time, who was fairly supportive, is who recruited me, was like, well, you know, when I present your case, I'm gonna show all of the data, because I actually had data that women and then Black women score 1 point lower, Black women score 1.5 to 2 points lower, you know, so, you know, you're not actually underperforming, you know, and I'm like, but that shouldn't have to be, you shouldn't have to be planning out 4 years in advance how you're gonna justify really horrible student evaluations that, you know, were clearly not substantive. You know, by my last year teaching, right before I left, my student evaluations were actually basically an argument between students. So half the class, you know, their comments were like, you're going to get this really horrible evaluation. Know that a bunch of students didn't respect you, but, you know, there was a good chunk of us that really liked you and felt you were support. You know, I mean, at this point, the student evaluations were no longer really about my teaching, right? And it was extremely painful. My final year in Indiana, I was very depressed and I didn't want to go to work. And when I made the choice to leave, I was going to go somewhere where I was either going to have a boss that was going to have my back with me as me, or I was just going to leave science because I wasn't going to do it anymore. There was 0 point in me being constantly depressed. So what I looked for when I looked for a new job was a boss that I felt was going to have my back. I was upfront. I caused trouble, but it's good trouble. And, you know, if you can deal with that, hire me. If you can't deal with that, don't. And I'm not going to say it's perfect here, because it's not. I mean, like Marco says, I still experience things. I know my trainees experience things. But I do feel like I have more control to demand change. I've definitely been given more leeway to implement what I believe will be meaningful change. And I don't just have a voice at the table, you know, most people at the table are gonna listen to what I have to say and go with it. You know, I have a VPR that likes my ideas and he's like, I think you know what you're doing, so I'm gonna support you. And that's a very different situation. You know, I'm at an even whiter university than I was before in Utah. But I feel like a lot of my colleagues, unlike when I was at Purdue, are actually allies. And from most of them, I don't get pushback when I make them feel uncomfortable. I have uncomfortable conversations with them. And they don't say, yeah, let's not talk about that because I don't like the way that makes me feel. They're like, I didn't think about that. That's really horrible. We should really do something about that. You know, they actually try to empathize with the situation, the majority of them, which I think makes all the difference. You know, like Roderick, I grew up in a majority Black place, right? So when I lived in Detroit, Detroit was 90% Black, and it was heavily redlined. There were no chain grocery stores, there were no chain pharmacies. You paid $2,500 every 6 months for no fault only car insurance, because the insurance industry, you know, blacklisted every Detroit zip code. And so even, you know, wealthy people still struggled more than wealthy people if you lived in the suburbs. But my parents were pretty committed to always staying in Detroit for many reasons. And so, you know, my lens through everything is, have I always had financial privilege? Yeah, I have. I grew up upper middle class. But that didn't save me from just as many horrible racist events as, you know, the kid whose parents make $25,000 a year working 4 jobs, right? Money doesn't protect you from racism. And, you know, my father's generation, and this isn't blaming them, but my father's generation really bought the myth of the good Negro and the model minority. And that it's, if you just talked like white people, you had their education, you know, you could be accepted. And it's just bullshit. And so I won't buy into it anymore. I did when I was younger, but I won't anymore. And so, you know, my goal when I finally leave this really white place is, you know, for my colleagues not to have the same view of assimilation is what's needed. I want acceptance, you know? People might be uncomfortable with the fact that I curse all the time, but it's me, you know? I tone it down a little bit for my kids, but, you know, you can't suppress yourself constantly. I think you walk a middle ground for professionalism, but, you know, professionalism is not whiteness. And getting academia to recognize that they can't be inclusive until whitewashing stops. And, you know, this is the same thing is true for LGBTQI, right? It's assimilation to a hetero norm, right? This is masculinity, this is femininity, and it's all based on white femininity, white masculinity. And, you know, until we eliminate that from academia, it's always going to be hard. Because even the most inclusive places, their default is still a little more towards assimilation.
I want to add, so this is a great segue into the question, and thank you so much for this candid, because I think a lot of us, right, that we're trainees, go through some of these experiences and really, like, because we're trainees, we don't feel like it's like the appropriate space or that we're allowed to kind of share how we really feel. And so we turn to each other to kind of sort of spill the tea, as some people say. But I digress. I think this is a question for Roderick specifically. Like, what can allies do to help address the disparities that URMs face in academia today?
I was literally typing a response to Miss, is it Hahan or Hoffman? I'm sorry, I don't want to mispronounce your name, Joanne or Joan? I believe Joanne. So we have to comprehend, well, there's two things that need to be comprehended. For those on one side of the spectrum, we have to comprehend that and teach how our society has been racialized and the impact that's had on students and your colleagues from URM groups. We have to comprehend that first. and the trajectory of that, all the way to who came up with race, who decided that I'm Black and you're white first, because we know in science that's like a false science, right? We know it's not it's not a critically thought out scientific concept. It's false. So who, and then why, and how has that been proliferated in our society? That's a fundamental thing. So critical race theory, I know some people are afraid of it, some people don't like it, but it's something that's an essential part of the work that we need to carry with us as we go through this work in academia. After that, you have to be an active instead of a passive bystander. You have to be, and I look at the protests and speaking with my grandparents and my parents, and how, somewhat surprised my grandparents are in seeing so many faces that do not look racialized as Black or brown that were in those streets protesting in the wake of the tragic events that have consistently happened in our country. And for them, it was, for them, they saw that to a certain extent, like in Freedom Summer and in Civil Rights Movement, but there was like, not to that degree. So for them, they feel like we're at a point in our country where we perhaps are having an awakening. But in order to be part of that awakening, you have to be an active person. If you see something go wrong, you can't be afraid to engage it. Now, the issue is that people are afraid because they feel like they don't know how to engage it. And that's true. I'm not saying you have to take someone by the throat and say, don't say that again, or don't do that. But at the same time, there are ways to engage faculty and students who are committing harmful behavior. And it could, and it's not always intentional. It's sometimes there's a great intent and a horrible impact. And so helping people see when they've, be visual, be alert or alarmed to when they've made a bad impact, and helping them shift that. And the way to do that is also help them have a channel to the students so they can hear and receive what the students have to say when they encounter it, so that they can be responsive to it. And it's, and that's, also about building credibility with them and the students, because, we forget outside of the context of this is that we have students and faculty in general who don't know how to communicate to each other, right? So you take that and then you compound it with the concept of race, or compound it with any type of socially constructed identity or issue, and it becomes worse. So you're mitigating, you're fighting those two things all at once. But for people on the other end of it, for URM folk also, because we're all doing this together. So on the other side of it, and you have to excuse me because my wife calls me intellectually bellicose, but you have to position yourself in the mindset that you're at war, not a war of aggression per se, but a war of attrition. One of my best books that my vice president of USM gave me was The Art of War for Managers, which is a derivation of, I guess, a take on Sun Tzu's The Art of War. And it's knowing the landscape, knowing your allies, knowing who could be your allies, how to make them your ally, and deciding if you have the ability, resources, and support to wage war, which really becomes a wellness question for yourself. And if that battle is capable of being won. And, I look at, what Dr. Fairfax just said in terms of the decision she made, whether or not she's going to stay in a place or move. That's a decision, right? That's a decision that, a wellness decision that she had to make, and it's a good one that she had to make. And that's one that a lot of URM folk have to make. So also, if you're on the other end, if you're not URM, ask yourself, what is this environment like? Are the person who's URM going to come here and they're going to have to wage a separate war in addition to their path to tenureship, or in addition to the student's path to graduating? Am I facilitating? What side of the war am I on in that capacity? And I think that's a way to look at things and how to approach it. But to be an ally, it's a choice, and it has to be an active choice.
Yeah, we definitely have to be like, I think now more than just like not right, we have to be actively anti-racist, just to kind of like rise to the level that we need to sort of get to today. I want to ask Stanley one last final question, and really thank you all for like your time. But we're nearing 7:30, just so that people, if you want to stay, this is wonderful. We'll keep talking, but if you don't, it's fine. Stanley, what is one piece of advice that you would give to the URM trainees that are here today?
I've always been asked that question in different forums. But so what usually I tend to ask the students in return is that, how many of you have heard of a town called Auchi? It's probably zero, right? So probably no one has heard of. So I come from this town called Auchi, and it's some spot, and it's in the map of Africa where you probably have no idea. So I tell them that if I, Stanley Adoro, can come from this town that nobody has, and you probably will never have reason to visit, can become who I am today, I think that everyone who puts their mind to it, which is what I have done all my life, and obviously been fortunate to have had very good mentors, you can get there as well. So it may sound cliche, but what I would tell them is, don't be afraid to dream your dreams. I mean, don't be afraid to pursue your goals. You know, it doesn't, your obviously we're all dealing with different challenges that are, you know, probably sometimes due to our skin color, but I think regardless, that should not stop you from dreaming your dreams or pursuing your goals. That, you know, I've had challenges coming here. I tell them, no, I came here with $300 when I was a grad student. That's all I had in my life, and I was 28-year-old. So, you know, if you set your mind to doing that, you will get it, and you know, it will be a source of what's the word, resilience. Having that conviction will serve you as a source of resilience in getting what you want to get. So I guess that would be my answer to that question.
Thank you, Stanley. I think we're nearing the end of this panel, and I really would like to thank everyone who is here today, Kiki, Marcus, Stanley, and Roderick, for your words of inspiration for all of us. I think in general, right, we've heard a story of like how, you know, how we need to create spaces not just for us, but for those that come behind us. And I think this is one thing that Inspire wants to do, is to sort of connect all the wonderful efforts that are being done at Penn and beyond Penn to promote the inclusion and retention of people like us. And so I would really encourage everyone here to go on to find your mentors, to find your spaces, and to actively voice your opinions, because I think our opinions as URM students and scientists and professors are really important to change the narrative, to change the conversation. And so I think, you know, we will leave it today. If you want to, I guess the panelists are leaving their emails in the chat. If you want to contact them, if the panelists are welcome, we have a couple questions, but if we want to just end it here, I'm happy to.
I can definitely answer some questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I kind of want to open the floor to the participants who are here to sort of ask their questions, because I think it's important that we as a community sort of have that space. So if anyone would like to ask a question, unmute yourself and share your camera, and then we can sort of go through them. Thank you so much. Right.
Jay, before the questions, there was something I wanted to add to the question you asked KK, and about how you felt discrimination or
yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Ethnicity. I guess another side of that, which may be a bit more innocuous, is this idea. So I was this happened to me when I was in so my university, he runs these bias training modules every year. So I took one of these bias training modules, and one of the participants, who was a faculty in one of the departments, brought up that, you know, the problem that we have with recruiting and with making these accommodations for URM and women is that one department, I won't mention the department, started employing this criteria to expand, or at least to more actively recruit people from the URM community and women. And the ranking of the department, or the quality of the department, took a nosedive, you know, dipped as a result of that. So I'm thinking that's the, you know, so it's not really direct discrimination, but it's the perception that by employing URM or women or people, or you are sacrificing quality, you know. So my response to him or to the person that they met, at least, and I didn't want to be belligerent. I said, you know, the goal here is to, if your understanding of URM is a poor quality, then it's not the problem of the URM, it's a problem of the search committee or the recruiting committee that has hired people of that quality. That what bias training really is, and what people should be more aware of, is that we need to create, you know, empirical criteria, for want of a better word, holistic criteria for evaluating people that does not, you know, subconsciously bring in our biases. So of the search committees and of people that are members of the committee looking for recruiting faculty. And that is something that one needs to keep speaking up about. I'm luckily, so in my department at the School of, in fact, at the School of Medicine at Case, I'm the only URM faculty, at least the Black faculty in the School of Medicine. So that's, but I have a chair who's very supportive and who's been very forward thinking in this regard. So I was hired without my first author paper, because you know very well, if you want to get an academic job, you know, you need to get a Cell, Science, Nature, one of these high profile paper. I would say you need to, but they help, they go a long way. But you know, but there are people who will get recruited without that level of publication. At least not immediate, not at the moment they're applying. I've seen people who've been employed without that. But the odds of being a URM and being employed without such high impact paper are even less. But my chair understood that I had a paper that was in process. So I got a job, and that was that. But I think the idea that recruiting URM equates to, you know, lowering down the quality is something that we have to, you know, speak up against. At least in this particular case, the idea is that you should make sure that you should create the criteria or the evaluations based on parameters that are going to, at least that's the goal. I don't know whether we will get it or not, but that should be the goal in recruitment, criteria and metrics that would at least remove the possibility of our biases influencing the decision-making process, not assuming that because we are going to recruit URM, so we're going to be dropping standards. And I think that's you know, is innocuous discrimination, if you ask me.
No, I agree with that 100%, Stanley. So I'm on lots of search committees, and I do both PhD and MD PhD admissions. And I fight really hard for a lot of URM students. But anybody who knows me knows that I have ridiculously high standards. So I don't go out on a limb and go to accept somebody that I believe is going to be mediocre. I look at their whole package, right? And so a kid that has worked a full-time job their whole time in college, still been able to graduate, still been able to do research, I'm sorry, much more likely to succeed than somebody whose parents paid for everything, has never worked, because they know how to do the hard work. And so I have a holistic picture of what people are, because particularly in science, the most important thing is actually resilience, right? You have to be able to withstand going 7 cycles of not discussed or just under the funding cutoff. You have to be able to withstand that. You have to be able to withstand, 8 rejections from journals for a paper that you know is really good before you find the journal that it's going to fit well in, right? And the students that have had to have resilience their whole life, they have a better shot at that than people that have had everything handed to them. So when you look 20 years later, I don't think it matters whether they had a Nature or Science paper, when they graduated with their PhD. I believe that doesn't actually correlate with long-term success. And so, I don't lower my standards. I just have a much more holistic lens of what's important for success in science than a lot of other people do. So I don't care what the grades are. If there's an upward trajectory, clearly they figured something out, if they write really well in their personal statement and they have a very good conversation with me about science with an understanding, doesn't matter what the grades are. You know, it doesn't matter what the standardized test scores are. For me, again, that's not having a white lens, right? And so for all the trainees here, if you don't know Lavia J, you should. She's fabulous. She's Nigerian American, and she's absolutely fabulous. So her new book is called Professional Troublemaker. I've tweeted about it if you follow me on Twitter. So she did a book signing tour, virtual book signing tour. And I went to the one where she was in conversation with Gabrielle Union. And the thing that really stuck with me is, what would your life be if you did not view your life through the lens of whiteness? If you did not center yourself in whiteness, right? And so I think there's value in what various cultures value the most, right? And for me, that's not what is necessarily white values, right? It's definitely, I'm gonna assume it's not for Marcos, because I know lots of people with the same background as Marcos, right? And it's about family, it's about providing for your family. My father's number one driving thing was providing for us and for us to have a less hard life than he did. He grew up dirt poor in West Virginia. That was his guide, right? Was to make a better life for us. And that's my guide for my kids. So yeah, I mean, I would love to have 3 R01s. I have 2 right now. I'd love to have 3, but I'm not a bad scientist because I don't have 3 R01s. For me, it's more important to have students email me and say that they appreciate the support I've given them, you know, that they see a path for themselves in academia. That is far more important to me than another grant.
Thank you. That was I mean, I'm my heart is filled right now. I want to open up the floor to the participants of this call. If you guys have any questions for like one of the panelists, or this is your moment to kind of say your piece. If no one volunteers, which I hope that doesn't happen, that we have some other questions, but does anyone want to ask our fantastic panelists today a specific question that is like burning on their minds?
Could I ask a question?
Sure, yes.
Hi, my name is Janae and I'm a second year. And I'm wondering what your advice is for navigating what's seemingly a new or just a rapidly growing, I guess, area of diversity committees as underrepresented or minoritized students, especially as student leaders. Kind of like, what can we do to stay sane while still having the heart to contribute to something? Or how can we kind of lead the way to make sure that, I guess, future students aren't like taken advantage of, or that this is actually something that grows into something useful? Does that make sense?
So it sounds like you're asking about your own trailblazing and what that looks like for you. Do I understand that correctly?
To an extent, yes.
So there are different ways of looking at that. I go back to that art of war example I gave earlier, reference I gave earlier, about comprehending your landscape and where you are, what it looks like. It's different for a student than it is for faculty. For me, I feel like faculty were paid to wage that war. Students, you are paying to wage that war. That doesn't sound right? You shouldn't pay to be in a fight. You know, Mike Tyson never paid $1 to get punched. It was the other way around. So, you know, at the same time, I comprehend that, having been in that space already, that by default, you are going to be taxed in that capacity. So the priority you want to focus on is what your wellness is, what your limits are. and what are those limits relative to your goal of graduating? Because that's what you're paying tuition for, to graduate. So that's anything that gets in the way of that, I want you to let go of. That may feel hard to do at times, but your priority and your mission is to get your degree and to get out. Then you can really start waging the right fight, a bigger fight as a faculty or as a researcher or as a careerist. Also, but should you choose to take on, to engage in that work, understand that you don't have to do it alone. Understand that there are people nationally who are doing this work, who've thought this stuff through, that you can depend on and that you should lean on. But also understand that, understanding the landscape is the biggest thing for me. Understanding the environment you're in, understanding what battle you have in front of you. Because some places are built to consume you and tire you out so you can leave. And you may or may not have the support of the resources to wage that war, and then you're isolated and you're depressed, and then you have so much going on. So you have to really comprehend that more than anything else and understand where you are. If you're in a place where you do have that support, even if it's one faculty member or if it's leadership who you feel, some of leadership who you feel gets it, great, go ahead and engage. And set an example for those who are under you to follow, and encourage them to work with you and to fight with you. Encourage others who don't look like you to work with you. And that's one thing I want to also emphasize. We tend to get in these spaces and do this work by ourselves, and we don't engage our colleagues who don't look like us. For whatever you have to. It's as much your responsibility their responsibility as it is yours. Don't let anyone off the hook who is in that moment who can help you. But again, I want to reemphasize, your wellness and your degree are your two most important things that you want to degree pursuit are two things you want to safeguard. And maybe that's a little paternalistic because I'm a dad as well. And I imagine with my nieces and my nephews and eventually my daughter and son when they get there, but I see friends who I've mentored, students that I mentor. I'm not gonna call you a kid, I'm only 40, but students that I mentor. And I see that more than anything. And it's like, that part of me wants to see them finish. And I say that because people who poured into me emphasize that you're going to finish as your priority.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I would say center your dream. Oh, go ahead, Marcos.
So I was in your guys' position like a million years ago, it feels like. So I started a diversity organization at the University of Colorado Health Sciences Center. So I was in the graduate program, but also School of Medicine, Pharmacy, Dental, Nursing. And we started a diversity organization when we were there, a bunch of us at the different campuses. And we had after school STEM programs, we have an MCAT prep course, we had all kinds of stuff, right? It all died out when we all left. And what I found is like, the more you invest, maybe things don't change. And I became very frustrated and very jaded about the process, right? And then all through postdoc and everything else. And this kind of falls in line with what Roderick said and with what Kiki said, right? Is if you're going to be invested in this, and I encourage you to, you have to understand the process. And it is a war. That means it's not going to change overnight. And you have to persevere, but you also can't lose your soul. So the thing is, you have to understand is you cannot change people. All you can do is control yourself. And so you have to make the choices that you think are the right choices, hoping that the long term, they will have the impacts. And I'll just give you a quick example and I'll shut up. And so when I went to Macalester, I always had people tell me again, and like Kiki said, assimilate, I have to act a certain way, talk a certain way, look a certain way. I'm a bald dude with earrings and I used to have a goatee, now I have a white beard because I'm old. But I've always looked the same because when I go back home, I don't want people to not forget who I am. And so a couple years ago, one of my mentees, and his mom was from Ghana, but he immigrated to Minnesota and, didn't have a dad and kind of looked towards me, I guess, as a father figure. And they told him he wanted to go to med school, but they told him you have to do all these things. But he was really invested in social justice. So in homeless, in prison population, he didn't do summer research. He worked in, doing social work. He'd worked at UCLA with a prison population, and he did all these things that were not traditional. And then he did well in the MCAT, he did well in school eventually, and then he got a bunch of interviews, and he got in almost every place, right? And he told me, he called me, he said, and the one place he wanted to go was Duke, because he had his hair because he thought they would tell him no. And he got into Duke and he got a full ride. He told me, and I went there and I rocked my braids and my earrings because you showed me I can. And so I didn't even know that he maintained his identity because of what I did. And that's what the thing is, right? You got to be yourself, and you got to fight the fight with the understanding that it's not going to change tomorrow or the next day or the next week. But the little bit, that's the war, and the perseverance, that's what keeps it going. And it's going to suck some days and it's going to be good some days, but that's the process. And if you're in, you're in. And if you're out, that's fine too. But you got to be invested long-term, and understand that it's not going to change the way you want it to, because that's not the way this world works, unfortunately.
Thank you for that.
I would say that this is something that you have to feel in your soul and want to do. And I don't think any Black or brown student should feel like they have to do this work if it's not their calling, because it's hard. And you know, it will hurt, it will kill you. If it's not your guiding light, it will destroy you. And so don't do it just because you feel like you have to do it, because it is not your job as a Black woman or anybody else's job as a Hispanic man, Hispanic woman, to teach anybody anything about race. That's not your job. You don't have to teach white people. If you choose to do that, then do that, if it's something you want to do. But it is not your job. It is not your burden. And don't make it your burden. So if it's part of your guiding light and what gets you out of bed in the morning, then do it. If it's not, then just focus on your science. Because white people have the luxury of just being a scientist, right? They don't have all the other baggage of race attached to them. And science is hard enough as it is. So what I want for trainees is to be able to just be a scientist, if that's what they want to do. And so I'm willing to do the work so that the younger generation has a choice, right? They can either do the work or they can just live their life and follow their own goals. But for over 100 years in this country, the burden of undoing racism, right? Of undoing segregation, has fallen on Black and brown people, and it shouldn't. So don't do this because you feel like you have to do it. And if you feel somebody's coming to you and asking you to be on a committee, if it's something you want to do, then do it. But also they should pay you and ask to be paid your worth, because it's work. But if you don't want to do it, say no thanks. And don't feel guilty. It is not your job to fix America's problems.
So Lindsay has a question. If you want to unmute yourself and ask a question, this is your time.
Hi, my name is Lindsay. I'm a first year at Penn in neuroscience, and I kind of wanted to respond and ask a follow-up question based on what you said. I started thinking is it my calling, or do I feel like I need to? And I felt like I do it because I don't want the people coming after me to lack, the resources and the access that they need and that they deserve. So I don't know does that make that my calling, or if it's what do you think?
Does it feel like a burden to you, or is it something you get enjoyment from? If you get enjoyment from helping people, right? I've been tutoring people since I was 12 or 13, okay? I like teaching. I wouldn't do it if I didn't like it. So it might be hard on many days, and there's times that I wish I had, more time to do other things, but at the end of the day, it's something I enjoy doing, right? When a student gets something, that makes me happy. And so if if seeing somebody behind you say, you know, thank you, you made XYZ easier for me, would make you happy, then do it. If it doesn't make you happy, then it's not your job and you don't need to be worried about doing it.
Thank you.
I think I'm gonna, I mean, honestly, thank you all so much for coming here, sharing your stories. I think, I mean, not just myself, but I really enjoyed this community and this space that we have created together. So from myself and all of the members of Penn INSPIRE, thank you to all of our panelists for joining us tonight. We will let you guys go, and thank you so much for your time, and thank you for everyone who took time to attend here. So a lot of snaps for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you for organizing this, Jay.
I mean, it's not just me, it's Jose and Alejandra and Vanessa and Kristen and everyone who's involved in Penn INSPIRE. So thank you all.
Yeah, you guys have a very good group, and I'm really happy that you guys have each other to support each other. So it helps.